Thank you so much for coming. And what a privilege it is, really, to talk about this subject and to learn about it and to sort of teach people about it in a way. And it's an answer to prayer in many ways, and that many people to thank as well that have gone into this, not least, of course, Andre Williams and the whole team at Christian Concern, and many other people that have inputted into my life in this whole area. The challenge of Islam, I'm just going to talk about this for a little bit, and then we'll get into some questions, but you can split the challenge of Islam, I'm assuming that most of you here recognize as a challenge to start with, into three areas. Firstly, the challenge, the apologetic challenge, as in how do we explain the gospel to Muslims, and how do we answer their questions, and how do you rebut their arguments and all of that kind of stuff. Well, Beth is here today, I don't know where she is now. Why don't you wave? There she is. Beth Peltiler, my good friend and expert in apologetics, wrote together the book Questions to Ask Your Muslim Friends, which is really a primer on that, just trying to encourage people. You can get into conversations, you can ask them some questions, and talk about faith with your Muslim friends, have a bit of confidence, because I think a lot of Christians feel they haven't got confidence about that. So it's really important that we have confidence in our apologetics to Muslims as well. So we wrote that book about that. Then there's the theological challenge, like how is Islam different to Christianity? Is it the same God? Is it not the same God? And what are the differences theologically and so on? Well, we've got the book Not the Same God, written by Sam Solomon, that Andrea said, one of the co-founders of Christian Concern, that tackles that subject specifically. And there's one chapter in the book there that talks about that as well a bit. But really, this book is about the cultural challenge that we face, how Islam is influencing our culture and the cultural issues, which I'll talk about in a minute, and how we can respond to those and understand those and best be equipped to challenge them in a way, or respond and critique them. So that's really what this book is primarily about. 9 years ago, Trevor Phillips, former head of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, said in an interview in the Sunday Times that integration of Muslims will probably be the hardest task we have ever faced as a nation. That's a big statement, isn't it? That's a big statement. You know, we can think about Nazism, we think about communism. Actually, Islam is the next big challenge that we face, and it could be the hardest task we've ever faced. And he said that 9 years ago, and nothing has happened in the intervening 9 years that would say, oh no, we've managed to conquer that challenge. No, it's only increased, it's only got more challenging in the intervening time. This is a quote from a video recorded at an Islamic conference a couple of years ago, and this British Islamic scholar says, when you look outside, you'd think you're in second Afghanistan, but you're in Londonistan. You're not a subjugated minority, you are the leaders of humanity. The point is, they think they're winning. They think we've got this. You know, we're creating Londonistan, and we're there in it. You remember that last year we had an attempt to blockade Parliament. They actually said, we want so many people to come that we'll have to lock the doors of Parliament itself. And they projected a genocidal Islamic chant, anti-Semitic chant, onto Parliament from the river to the sea. Palestine should be free. No action taken by the police on that. And the Speaker broke with parliamentary convention at that time because he was scared for the safety of MPs. That is a new thing, right? That is a new thing. Islam raising its head and causing Parliament to break convention. That's a big deal. Suella Braverman, former Home Secretary, said at the time, Islamists are bullying Britain into submission. She said, the truth is the Islamists, the extremists, the anti-Semites are in charge now. They bully the Labour Party, they bully our institutions, and now they bully our country into submission. This is a crisis, and the fight back must start now with urgency if we are to preserve the liberties we cherish and the privileges this country affords us all, if we're to have any chance of saving our country from the mob. There's the challenge, if you like. And just looking at the demographics, as according to the last census, Muslims, 6.5% of the population in 2021. Just that, in the last 60 years, since 1960, there was 100,000 Muslims in the country in 1960. Now it's, 4 million or so? Massive growth. Easily the fastest growing religion over that time. It's doubled in about the last 20 years or so. estimated to get to 17% of the population by 2050. Already 10% of higher education students are Muslim, and disproportionately 18% of the prison population is Muslim. When it's 6.5%, you sort of think that's quite a small amount, but think about the influence of the LGBT community on this country, and that's about 2% of the population, and how much change they've influenced our culture. And this is 6.5% already. And of course, in certain areas, they're very concentrated. Tower Hamlets, it's nearly 40%. Various other boroughs, Blackburn with Darwen, Newham, Luton, Redbridge, Bradford, Birmingham, all over 30% of the population in those areas. You can go to many other areas of the country, and it's very low population. You wouldn't notice, you wouldn't think it's an issue at all. But in certain areas, it really is. And if you visit those areas, you'll see it. The top boy's name in the country is Mohammed. And that, for the first time, even without spelling variations, that's been there. Actually, if you count spelling variations, there are about 5 or 6 different ways you can spell Mohammed. It's been the top boy's name for 13 years now, actually, in this country. That just says something about the demographics. And, the average age of the population is 40. Any ideas what the average age of Christians is in the country? Not quite as old as 65. No, you're pessimist. 51 it is. But what about Muslims? Okay, well, it's 27. There's your challenge right there, right? We aren't getting enough young people in our churches, right? We're not reaching the young people enough. Muslims, on average, are younger, energetic, and enthusiastic, and all of that kind of thing, and we're older, and that's a challenge for us. Ed Hussein, a moderate Muslim, wrote this book in 2021. What he did is he went to visit the major mosques in all the major towns in the country, London, Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow, etc. He said, in these towns, quite often there are no-go areas for non-Muslims. Everyone knows you don't go in those areas if you're not a Muslim. Major retailers have deserted those areas. There's no pubs, there's no McDonald's, there's no W.H. Smith, all that kind of stuff. Women are segregated and veiled in the community in general. Fundamentalist literature of the kind banned in Saudi Arabia is freely available on sale at all of those Islamic bookshops in those mosques. That should be a wake-up call, shouldn't it? Fundamentalist literature of the kind that is banned in Saudi Arabia, walk into a mosque in London, you'll get it. Easy. Nobody's trying to stop it from being sold. For the first time, we saw an open Muslim influence on our election last year, this new organization called the Muslim Vote. This is from their webpage. That is all the constituencies that they said have more than 30% of Muslims in the constituency. And they made a clear attempt to target and coordinate the Muslim vote, as they call it, in the last election. Sarah Champion, one of many MPs that was endorsed by Muslim Vote. That was an image she put on her social media account. Muslims were more than 50% of the electorate in 4 constituencies in the last election. In 2011, there were more than 25% in 21 constituencies. Now that's 30 constituencies. In 2011, it was 10% in 82 constituencies. Now that's 120 constituencies. The difference between the first past the post, the person who wins the seat, and the next person is normally less than 10% of the vote. So 10% is enough to swing the vote in 120 constituencies at the moment. Shaukat Adam, one of those, you may know they got 5 independent MPs into Parliament in the last election. Shaukat Adam is one of them. This is an election leaflet that was used in his constituency, probably breaking the rules because it doesn't say who published it, so therefore the funding can't be traced, which it should be traced. Shaukat's brother has praised Hamas and praised a Palestinian gunman who was shot dead after murdering a Jewish tour guide, called him a martyr. One of his activist supporters has been charged with encouragement to terrorism and a convicted public disorder during the Leicester riots. And another candidate for Muslim Vote was detained on the Terrorism Act in January. This chap is another of these MPs. He's now the MP for Dewsbury and Batley. He told hundreds of workers in a public meeting, follow the teaching of the prophet, and vote for me. And if you don't vote for me, I will ask you, I gave you this blessing, what do you do with it? You have a duty to vote for just representatives, and I am a just representative. So this is spiritual manipulation. Muslims should vote for me. That's a breach of the law on spiritual influence in elections, and that's an issue that he should be faced up for, and that is how he got people to vote for him in Dewsbury. Muslim Vote themselves claimed that 50 candidates that they backed became MPs. So there are 50 candidates that they say fully support their campaign who are now MPs in Parliament today. Their demands include recognising a Palestinian state, ending military ties with Israel, Muslims being allowed to pray at school, which relates to a case I'll tell you about in a minute, adopt the APP definition of Islamophobia, which I'll tell you about. They want Sharia-compliant pensions in every workplace, talk about Sharia finance, and they want to remove the spiritual influence law, which I alluded to allow them to spiritually manipulate Muslims to vote for them. This chart is very interesting. It shows the portion of Muslims in a constituency on the left-hand side increasing as you go down, and the drop in the vote for Labour is basically almost exactly correlated. The higher the Muslims, the more Labour lost the vote. And that's what caused 5 people to get independent seats, but also massive reduction in majorities of Labour MPs at the last election. They are very, very aware of this and very conscious of losing the Muslim vote, which they used to be able to rely on in the last election. I expect by the next election we'll have a full-on Islamic party nationally across the country. I think the Muslim vote was the first stage of that. By the next election, I expect we'll see an Islamic political party. There is already an Islamic political party in Tower Hamlets. The Aspire party controls the council. So we have a council that is fully Islamic controlled today by Aspire. It's not controlled by Labour or Conservatives or anyone else like that. Aspire, there's no website, there's no constitution publicly available for anyone to see. It's exclusively Bangladeshi men. The mayor of that council now previously was convicted of fraud and this offence of undue spiritual influence because he was manipulating people spiritually to vote for him. He was banned from standing for any party for 5 years. Now he's back in, and now he is the mayor of Tower Hamlets. And there have been all sorts of further issues about discrimination, all those kind of things with him. That's what we're seeing on a local level already. It won't be too long before it becomes to a national level. Polling that we saw last year said only 24% of Muslims believe that Hamas carried out murder and rape in Israel on October the 27th. 29% have a positive view of Hamas. 20% support legalizing polygamy. 30% support Sharia law. 57% want compulsory halal food in all schools and hospitals. And 52% think it should be illegal to show an image of Muhammad. Last year I did a debate with a chap called Reza Aslan on is Islam anti-Semitic. I was very surprised to be asked because Reza Aslan is a professor and he's written 2 New York Times best-selling books. I'm not a professor, and so far I haven't written any books that are New York Times bestsellers, although I have high hopes for this book, but I don't really think it will get that far. And after praying about it and talking about it with various people, I agreed to do the debate because I thought the texts are so clear in the Quran. The text is so clear that it's anti-Semitic. Like, what is he going to say? I just have to read the text. And you can see there's a chapter of the book where I outline all the research I did. You've got all the texts from the Quran, you've got all the texts from the Hadith, you've got all the Islamic theologians, you've got all the historical examples of anti-Semitism. So yes, Islam is anti-Semitic, and that's one of the chapters in the book. And the point then is that anti-Semitism in Islam predates the Arab-Israeli conflict. Everyone thinks it's caused by that. It really isn't. It goes right back to Muhammad and right back to the texts. The whole area of education is a key battlefield in our culture generally. Everyone recognises this. This was a landmark moment, I feel, when this school in Newham, which had been named the best primary school in England in 2017, wanted to ban children, girls under 8 years old, from wearing the hijab as part of their school uniform. It's only a radical view that says prepubescent girls should wear a hijab, but The Muslims were not happy about it. They staged a protest. They did all sorts of complaining and so on. And in the end, the school, they asked support from the government. You thought the government would step in and support them, but they didn't. And so they backed down. This is Islamization of schools by Muslims saying, we insist this. And eventually the school backs down to it. We're told there are 150 schools which make wearing a hijab compulsory in this country. That is an image of the all-party parliamentary group on British Muslims, and one of their meetings where they are obviously all kneeling down to pray in Parliament. Just says something about their boldness and their interest in dominating that place. If you buy chicken from any of these places, you will be buying halal meat that has been ritually slaughtered and had an Islamic prayer said over the animal when it died. The UK is now the leader, carrying out more halal slaughter than the rest of Europe combined. Most of us eat halal meat without even realizing it's not labeled. There's no requirement to label it as halal in this country as it stands at the moment. The halal market is about £2.6 billion in Britain alone, and it's becoming a big export market too. Basically, this whole industry has become Islamic. The whole industry of meat in Britain largely taken over by Islam. Did you realize that? We had this big international investment summit in Britain last year. Lots of big razzmatazz about it. Did you know they served halal food at that event? The British investment event, by the way, we're going to serve you halal food at it. Fashion, when you have women risking their lives by burning hijabs in Iran, here in Britain we're celebrating it and creating big events to celebrate Islamic fashion in this kind of way. 350,000 people at the big Eid takeover. Any Christian festivals get anywhere near that amount that you know of? This is way, way bigger than any Christian festival in this country. The biggest religious festival in this country are Islamic festivals. That's actually where we are today. The biggest religious festivals in this country are Islamic festivals. We saw hijab of the day displayed in King's Cross train station last year. It was only stopped when people complained about it. You've never seen them display Bible verse of the day, have you? All right, but we had hadith of the day on King's Cross station display last year. These are British signs. You wouldn't know you were in Britain, would you? That's a British motorway. Last year in Britain, during Easter, we didn't celebrate Easter. No, forget that. We celebrated Ramadan. See the cultural influence, right? See the cultural power, right? A few decades ago, that would have been unthinkable to celebrate Ramadan instead of Easter. And now that's what happens in London. We celebrate Ramadan instead of Easter. There are estimated about 85 Sharia councils in Britain. Undercover journalists have found that they systematically discriminate against women. No surprise, because that's what Sharia law does. Government inquiries confirmed that that's happening as well. And that's a kind of parallel legal system that has kind of been set up across the country, and it's kind of underground and not often talked about. Obviously, we saw an assassination of an MP just a couple of years ago. I was shocked because the reaction in Parliament was social media is the problem. You know, we need to curb social media. We need to do something about this awful social media that's getting people radicalized. It wasn't social media at all. The chap said clearly, he stated it, that he was struck by a verse in the Quran which says, strike them wherever you find them. He told the court, if you encourage someone to an act of jihad, it's a good thing. He stated, I killed him in the cause of Muslims and for the sake of Allah. It's nothing to do with social media. It's about Islam. He deliberately assassinated him for Islam. He's not the first attempted MP assassination either. Stephen Timms was stabbed by a Muslim woman with Islamic motives back in 2010 and was very lucky to survive the attack. And of course, we then saw an MP say, I'm not going to stand, the pressure's too much, mentioning threats from Muslims in his constituency. And in fact, he had been a target of the same chap who killed Sir David Amess. Then there's Islamic finance, which Andrea mentioned. There's a chapter in the book about that. Islamic finance is based on a modern, radical interpretation of the Quran. You've all heard the idea that Muslims prohibit interest. That's not normally the way Muslims think about it. They think about it as they prohibit usury, much like we do as Christians as well. Most Muslims throughout history have been happy to borrow and lend with interest, and today most Muslims will be happy to do borrow and lend with interest. The idea behind Islamic finance is to set up a rival financial system and to legitimize Sharia law more generally, as illustrated by Taqi Usmani and him openly saying jihad should continue until they pay the jizya tax. I mean, crikey, that's what he wants, and he was the head of the Sharia Advisory Board at HSBC. We are the first non-Muslim country in the world to issue a Sharia bond. In fact, we've issued 2 Sharia bonds. We have 2 government bonds that are effectively governed by Sharia law in this country, and we're trying to become a centre of Islamic finance, and I think that's just legitimising Sharia law generally, and it has problems, and there's a whole chapter in the book about that. In prisons, we have a real problem with Islamic gangs that dominate the prisons. If you go to prison, they'll put a Quran in your bed to see how you react to it, and you'll be treated accordingly to that. And there are sort of Sharia courts and all that kind of stuff. We've had the whole rape gang thing, which has been back in the news recently, of course. Horrific testimonies from women. We helped a woman who had, I think, 4 Sharia marriages and forced to memorize the Quran and all this kind of stuff. Islam is very much connected. There's a chapter in the book called Sacrificing Girls to Political Correctness, which talks about this and goes through the Islamic justification that there is in the text for having sex slaves, and that has been used by some of these rapists to do that. You see examples of underage girls where it's illegal, obviously, to have sex with a girl under 16, and the police don't treat it as a crime. And why don't they treat it as a crime? Oh, because I'm worried about being called racist or Islamophobic, is the testimonies that we've heard about this. This is one of those. There are several testimony books like this. Just a child, Sammy Woodhouse's account, groomed for the age of 14, became pregnant, police took no action. Oh, well, she just became pregnant, who cares? The police even caught her having sex with her perpetrator and charged her with possession of a defensive weapon and didn't charge him. Why is that going on? Police colluded, warned the perpetrators. She says she let her perpetrator groom her son into Islam. So there's Islam as a factor in there. And eventually she was one of the big whistleblowers who broke the story to Andrew Norfolk in the Times, which started the whole thing of people publicly becoming aware of this. There are like 50 towns in the country where these gangs have been prosecuted. It is a national problem. The girls get trafficked as well across towns, across county borders. The idea you can deal with this with 5 local inquiries is crazy, because how can a local inquiry deal with girls being trafficked from one border to another, for a start? So, we need a full national inquiry, and it was good to see the pressure on the government about this earlier this year in relation to that. And of course, then the whole thing about policing, this chap was imprisoned for saying, who the F is Allah? No violence, no accusation of any violence or anything like that. But that was a prison-worthy sentence. That's basically a blasphemy law, isn't it? If somebody came here and said, who the F is Jesus, you'd never imagine they'd get a prison sentence for that. But Allah, no, we have to put you in prison if you insult him. That's really significant for our culture. That's where we've got to. We imprison people for insulting Allah, but not for insulting Jesus. Here's a lovely global peace and unity festival that was held last year in London. Looks all a wonderful thing. And then you realize they handed out a leaflet there with some reclaim the dictionary ideas. And it says, we say resistance, you should too, antonym terrorism. And they say, don't call it terrorism, call it resistance, because that's fine, and nobody will call you a terrorist sympathizer if you do that. So it's just interesting to see that being openly said in London like that. This chap was convicted last year of attempting to attack Hatun Tash, Christian preacher, at Speaker's Corner. He also planned to attack the Queen's funeral, decided it was too late to do that. He was converted to Islam aged 18 while in prison. It's a problem we're seeing, that criminals go to prison and they convert to Islam. And that's how he became radicalized. This chap, again, was convicted last year attempting to kill his housemate. The judge says a terrorist influence. When he intended to kill him, it was intended to punish him for converting to Christianity, because that is not permitted by a Muslim faith. Good to see the judge recognizing that. And that is, of course, in the text, in that hadith, whoever changes Islamic religion, then kill him. And speaking of terrorism, the latest contest report says Islamist is the greatest threat, 67% of attacks since 2018, 75% of MI5 caseload, 64% of those in custody, and multiple attacks. They've been incredibly successful at foiling attacks, actually. That was one of them, the Hatton Tash one. Incredibly successful. Pray for them, because I don't know how they do it, but at any one time they've got 800 investigations at any one time, 169 arrests in 2022. And then the whole thing about free speech, that is threatened now by Islam. Some of you are old enough to remember Salman Rushdie's book, The Satanic Verses. There's a chapter in the book about that. It's called From Fatwa to Fear, which I wrote on the 30th anniversary of this happening. We all learnt the meaning of fatwa for the first time in the country then. And Salman Rushdie, of course, was taken into hiding for 10 years plus. Of course, sadly, he was attacked in 2022 and lost the sight of an eye, and his hand and various other injuries. Was very lucky to survive it. Back in 1989, the Archbishop of Canterbury at that time said maybe we should extend blasphemy laws to Islam. That's the kind of reaction. There's a whole chapter I've got about the reaction to that. But the reaction persists in terms of publishing today. I've got a copy of this book at home, Oxford University Press, a very short introduction to Islam. There's a blank page in the book. And as in small print, it says, the first edition of this book contained an illustration from a famous manuscript in Edinburgh University Library. Although the manuscript is widely regarded as a masterpiece, often reproduced, a small number of readers found the picture blasphemous. So what did Oxford University Press do? They applied Sharia law and censored that image. That's the image. That's a classic piece. Most Muslims would not find that blasphemous, but Oxford University Press do, so they won't publish it for you. And we had this APPG definition of Islamophobia that came out in 2018. It's incredibly vague. Look at that. Islamophobia is rooted in racism, is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. Well, first of all, Islam is not a race, so that makes no sense to say that. And Islam is not defined. And what is Muslimness? Who knows? And even it doesn't matter that you don't know, because anyone can say it is, because it's perceived Muslimness. So you say anything that's perceived as being Islamophobic, basically it is Islamophobic by definition. And examples in the report include things that are actually about Islam itself, saying things like Islam spread by the sword, or certain things about Muhammad. Specifically, they say that's Islamophobic. So in other words, they're trying to protect Islam from criticism with this definition. There's a whole, this report that I wrote for the Free Speech Union is reproduced in the book for you about this. This definition has been formally adopted by the Labour Party, Liberal Democrats, Scottish National Party, Plaid Cymru, and dozens of local councils up and down the country have formally adopted it. This means that most politicians in the country today know that if they say something that someone thinks is Islamophobic, they could be disciplined by their party or suspended or removed. So they are subject to an effective blasphemy law today in politics, in Parliament. That's how it is right now with our MPs. And of course, the news this week is that Angela Rayner wants to set up a commission to define Islamophobia. The Labour Party's already got this definition as part of its code of conduct, so they may well do the same one. They want to appoint Dominic Grieve as the chair. Well, he wrote the forward to that report by the APPG commending that definition. They want to get Kari Asim shortlisted for the council in spite of the fact that he was dropped by the previous government for advising on Islamophobia because he led and coordinated protests against a film about Muhammad, because he's actually quite a hardline chap, and you can read about that in my book as well. Why are they inviting these people? Because they want to restrict free speech. Angela Rayner knows that her seat is under threat from Muslims. She probably wants to appease them by bringing in a blasphemy law of some kind, or making this more concrete, effectively. This is the film, The Lady of Heaven. Those are the protests. And The point about this is it was a successful protest, so we won't see any films that make any mention of Islam ever again in this country. That's the way it is, right? That's stopped now. Nobody's going to fund a film that talks about Islam. The Batley Grammar School teacher, still in hiding today, 4 years later, he wanted to teach a lesson about free speech. We all learnt the lesson about free speech. It's the most powerful lesson he ever taught. We do not have free speech when it relates to Islam. Remember this story about a Wakefield school chap pupil who took in his own copy of a Quran, and it got dropped, it got knocked out of his hand, and my goodness, the police got involved, and it was reported a non-crime hate incident. For what? For dropping a book that he owned? That's crazy, right? That is crazy. But it was a Quran. In this country, you better not insult the Quran. Police will get involved. By the way, that council has adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia, probably connected to that. Of course, this week we saw a man in court for burning pages of the Quran. I wouldn't recommend you do that. I don't advise it, don't support it, but burning a book is not an offense. But burn a Quran, my goodness, you're going to get in trouble. And the police disgracefully released his name, his date of birth, and where he lives, so the Muslims can get him. So Batley Grammar School teacher still in hiding. This chap is not going to be able to be safe anymore because the police did that. Again, in schools, this school wanted to ban pro-Palestinian badges in the school. There were threats to the staff, and the school had to close at the end of term early, and police officers had to be stationed there, private security had to be hired. The pressure on these schools is high, right? This is Catherine Babal Singh's school, and there was an activist pupil who wanted to have prayer in the playground and sort of trying to encourage people and shame people if they don't want to join her in prayer, all that kind of stuff. Catherine said, no, I'm not going to have this. I'm not a religious school. We're not going to have this sectarianism. And it caused a court case. And it went to court. And fortunately, the court supported her and said, no, it's not practical to do this. And we then later found out that pupil had previously been suspended for stabbing a girl and all this kind of thing. And this is why it's part of the Muslim Votes campaign to allow Muslim prayers in schools. Hassan Tash, of course, is one of the bravest evangelists in the country, isn't she? Yes. She has a provocative style, but it works. She has a provocative style, and she gets out there and she goes out and speaks. She's been assaulted, she's been knocked over, she's had goods stolen from her. She's been arrested several times by the police and held overnight. I think we've got the police to pay £10,000 compensation to her for wrongful arrest twice. Now, the police are scared to tackle the Muslims. They don't want to tackle the Muslims, so they arrest her instead. And she was stabbed from behind and narrowly missed her neck, and fortunate to survive from that. She reckons that she's seen over 1,000 Muslims convert to Christianity, including 120 imams. Well, we need more people like her, don't we? And this is the courage that we need. We need courage, for this challenge. We need courage to stand up to Islam. The book concludes with a chapter with some policy recommendations. I'll just whiz through them. Ban Sharia councils, register marriages. Didn't talk about that, but that's if you enforce registration of religious marriages, that means you don't have these unregistered Sharia marriages, which creates a problem for the women. If the guy divorces them or leaves or dies, they have no legal rights. Also means there could be polygamous marriages, so enforce registration of marriages. Ban face veils. That's actually been done in 16 countries. Did you know that? It's been done in Tunisia, Austria, Denmark, France, Belgium, Cameroon, Bulgaria, Netherlands, and Switzerland. So why can't we do that too? Tighter marriage visa rules, that's about immigration, the first generation, every generation is a firstborn in that generation. Ensure the police enforce the law equally, regardless of culture, religion, or ethnicity. This is the whole two-tier policing thing, which is not a new issue, but it's very much alive, and we need to stop it. Stop promoting Islamic finance. Unashamedly identify the nation as a Christian country. We all saw that at the coronation a few years ago. Robustly defends free speech, so that Islam can be criticised but prosecute incitement to violence. Ban foreign funding of Islam. This is basically a foreign power trying to take us over. This has been done in Austria and Denmark. They've banned foreign funding of mosques. Why don't we do that too? And obviously we need to cut levels of immigration. Everyone agrees with that. So that gives you a picture of the challenge of Islam and the challenge that we face today. A lot more in the book. I hope you read it. I hope you find it interesting and informative. And I hope you have the courage and the conviction to decide you're going to stand up to the challenge. Thank you very much for listening.